Welcome back to Lecture 8 of the course, The State of the United States Economy and Society. The title of this part is Widening Gaps in Income. For a large percentage of working persons, income has stagnated or fallen in both nominal and real terms over the last 40 years. Wide is the gap between those at the top and bottom of the income ladder in the United States. The Census Bureau of Economic Analysis reported a median household income in September of 2025 of $85,157, indicating a modest increase from a year earlier. This graph was published in December 2025 using 2024's figures from the U.S. Census Bureau. It is notable that the top 20% of households have more income than the rest of the population, with an average income of $316,100. Where one lives in the United States makes a significant difference. States with the largest cities and most populous metropolitan areas generally have higher median incomes, but they also tend to have much higher residential property costs. U.S. Census Bureau data for 2024 indicated that nominal incomes are rising the fastest in Colorado, Georgia, Maine, Montana, and Tennessee. The rate in Pennsylvania is 13%, in New Jersey 18%. Remember, however, that this does not take into consideration the rising cost of living during this period of 2019 through 2024. Forbes magazine reported the following on January 8, 2026 regarding the nation's worsening wealth concentration. Quote, the richest 1% of households in the United States have accumulated almost 1,000 times more wealth than the poorest 20% over the last 3.5 decades, and economic inequality is getting worse at a rapid pace. The analysis, published by Oxfam on Monday, found that between 1989 and 2022, a household in the top 0.1% gained an average of $39.5 million in wealth, while a top 1% household gained $8.35 million. By contrast, a bottom 20% household gained less than $8,500 during the same period. This map highlights the income floor required to enter the wealthiest bracket in each state for 2025. The spread is wide, stretching from over $1 million at the top to barely $400,000 in less wealthy states. Note the significant difference between New Jersey, $901,000, and Pennsylvania, $656,000. This chart shows that despite almost continuous increases in labor productivity, hardly any of this increase has resulted in increases in worker compensation. One reason is declining union membership, raising a number of important questions on the reasons why fewer and fewer workers are unionized. The union membership rate was 10% in 2025, a slight uptick from 9.9% in 2024. However, this is still near the record low compared to 1983, when 20.1% of workers were union members. In absolute terms, the number of union members rose to approximately 14.7 million in 2025. As is often the case, the devil is in the details, and when the details are analyzed, there is controversy. An opinion article by Leonid Brzezinski, printed by Bloomberg in January of 2019, explains. Much of the current debate about inherited wealth in a number of Western countries is informed by the notion that most of today's top incomes are the product of passive returns on financial capital rather than labor. But in a new National Bureau of Economic Research working paper, 4 U.S. economists stipulate that much of that income actually comes from the returns on the aptitudes or human capital of the working rich. These returns are so great because large human capital is exceedingly rare. This perspective reveals one of the problems caused by the terminology of the economics discipline. Human beings have talents, skills, abilities, and knowledge. These are the characteristics that cause individuals to differ in their ability to labor efficiently, as well as efficiently utilize tools, capital goods, etc. There is no such thing as human capital. Are the people running huge corporations worth what they receive in compensation? What about the decisions made to use corporate cash to buy back shares of stock rather than to invest in real growth and innovation? A research project undertaken by several economists at the University of Chicago and published in January of 2019 by the U.S. Treasury Department raised a number of important issues regarding the income level of those holding executive positions in businesses and other organizations. One of the co-authors of this paper, Eric Zwick, explained the findings published in this paper at a program at the University of Chicago as they pertain to firms owned and managed by one or a small number of key individuals. He says, most capitalists in the 21st century appear to resemble the working rich and not the coupon-clipping rentiers of Marx's era. Owners are not only actively involved, but are in some sense instrumental to the income-generating activity that is going on in these firms. But what about the firms governed by a large board of directors and managed by persons not promoted within the organization based on their direct contributions to the firm's success? Critics of corporate executive compensation point to the huge and growing disparity between those in the executive ranks and everyone else. The median total compensation for S&P 500 CEOs reported in 2025 proxy filings ranged from $16.4 million to $17.7 million, representing a year-over-year increase of approximately 6% to 10%. This growth was primarily driven by high-value equity awards and record stock market performance in fiscal year 2024. Well, what does race and gender have to do with all this? In 2024, the median income for black households was $56,020, which is significantly lower than the median income of $92,530 for white households, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Statistics issued by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in December 2025 put the average weekly earnings for a man at $1,333 per week, for women $1,076. What does formal education have to do with it? Thanks to the high number of births in 2007, the graduating class of 2025 was the largest and most ethnically diverse in U.S. history. About 70% of high school graduates go on to enter a 2- or 4-year college. Between 1993 and 2023, educational attainment skyrocketed among adults aged 25 and older, with a 74.9% increase in college graduates. High school completion increased 14%. 91.4% of Americans aged 25 years and older have attained at least a high school diploma. 38.3% are college graduates. 39.7% of American women aged 25 plus are college graduates. 36.9% of American men have college degrees. Formal education definitely has a strong relationship between individual income and the incidence of unemployment. But remember, what is presented here is median income. At each level of formal education, half of all persons earn more and half earn less. And even where the educational attainment is the same for men and women, men still receive higher annual incomes. Women collectively earn 17% less than men based on both the jobs they have and how they are paid in those jobs. This is unchanged from 2024. Based on late 2025, early 2026 Bureau of Labor Statistics data, women's median weekly earnings were approximately $1,076 to $1,083 for full-time work. Earnings varied significantly by race. Asian women earned the most, approximately $1,395 to $1,566, followed by white women, $1,108, black women, $942, and Hispanic women, $889. Well, what about the widening gaps in asset ownership? As great is the difference in individual and household income between those at the top and those at the bottom, the difference is even more pronounced regarding the assets held by individuals and households. A paper written by UC Berkeley economics professor Gabriel Zucman, published in February of 2019 by the National Bureau of Economic Research, concluded that income inequality had again reached levels last seen in the years just before the Great Depression and the Great Recession of 2008. Professor Zucman wrote, "Wealth inequality has increased dramatically since the 1980s, with the top 1% wealth share around 40% in 2016 versus 25% to 30% in the 1980s. The wealth share owned by the bottom 90% has collapsed in similar proportions. The situation has continued to become acute since 2019. No surprises here. The share of net worth held by the top 1% continues to increase, while that held by the bottom 50% barely registers. In 2024, the 400 richest Americans had a combined net worth of $5.4 trillion. The Forbes 400 for 2026 has not been released yet, as the definitive annual ranking of the wealthiest Americans is typically published in September of each year. Their wealth is now estimated at $6.6 trillion. The leaders in wealth held as of February are as follows. Elon Musk is the richest American with a net worth of $726 billion, up from $428 billion at the beginning of 2025. He is followed by Larry Page, $276 billion, Jeff Bezos, $254 billion, Mark Zuckerberg, and Larry Ellison. Alexander Karp, co-founder and CEO of Palantir Technologies, is now reported to be the richest African American. David Stewart, founder of Worldwide Technology, follows Karp at $12.4 billion. Here we see that as of 2025, the two measurements of net worth provide some insight into who has how much wealth based on age. Take a look at this for a few seconds. A report issued in September of 2017 by the Institute for Policy Studies examined the extent to which wealth concentration is leading to deepening poverty among black households in the United States. Mean net worth is the average calculated by adding all net worth values and dividing by the number of households, making it sensitive to very wealthy outliers. Median net worth represents the middle value, where half of households have more and half have less, giving a clearer view of the typical household's financial position. So what are we looking at? Well, white households in the middle income quintile own nearly 8 times as much wealth as black middle income earners and 10 times that of their Latino counterparts. On average, only black and Latino households with an advanced degree have middle class wealth or higher, while white households on average need only a high school diploma to obtain that same level of wealth. As of the fourth quarter of 2025, 65.1% of U.S. households own the residential property in which they live. The rate of home ownership for all racial and ethnic groups except for blacks has recovered since the subprime mortgage crash of 2008. A 2023 analysis by the National Association of Realtors concludes, black homeowners and renters are more cost burdened than any other racial group. Less than 10% of black renters can afford to buy the typical home. Black homeowners spend more of their income to own their homes than all racial groups, with 30% being cost burdened, defined as spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That's followed by Hispanic Americans, 28%, Asian Americans, 26%, and white Americans, 21%. As of February 2026, recent analysis of federal data indicate that the U.S. racial wealth gap remains wide and in some segments continues to grow. While median household incomes for most racial and ethnic groups increased through 2024, the disparity in accumulated assets, such as home equity and stock investments, remains the primary driver of wealth inequality. According to the most recent Federal Reserve data published late 2023 and referenced into 2025-2026, Asian families held a median wealth of $536,000 and a mean wealth of $1,826,900, significantly higher than other racial groups. For Asian Americans, the level of net worth depends on a number of factors, especially how many generations ago one's ethnic group came to the United States and the level of education of those living. Another factor is the percentage of an Asian American group who remain undocumented. Black workers ages 51 to 64 are the least likely among all racial and ethnic groups to have a retirement account, according to a July 2023 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. When they do have one, their median balance is far below that of similarly aged white adults across all income levels. Among those in the bottom one-third, the median value of retirement accounts for whites is around $57,000, for blacks $13,000. More than half of all retirees, 53%, report that Social Security is their primary source of income throughout retirement. Reliance is significantly higher for those with household incomes under $50,000, where 85% cite it as their primary income source. That does it for what we have on wealth concentration. So what's next? Moving on, we will next take a close look at how we own and manage nature. And we've reached the end of Lecture 8.